Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to go over how to fund your living trust. Now, if you've been watching my channel for any time, you know that I'm very, very bullish on using living trusts and creating legacies that are thoughtful rather than just doing die and distribute and forcing yourself into probate. We want to avoid court, we want to keep our stuff private, but in order to do that, we need to transfer the asset out of our names during our lifetime and into the name of the trust. And let me show you how easy it is to do this and why we do this. So just as a reinforcement, there are three options when you pass away. Option one is I don't do anything, and it's called passing away intestate. That's what Prince did, for example, and it ended up for years getting his assets stuck into a probate process, which is the state court process for distributing assets. Number two is doing a will. And a lot of people do a will, and it's just what happens when I pass away, where do my assets go? And it requires the probate process, unless it's such a small estate that you might be able to do it via declarations, kind of in a different way. Sometimes in certain states, like where I'm in Nevada, you might be able to transfer a car, for example, without having to go through the whole probate process. But if you have a sizable estate, you're absolutely going through probate. If you have real estate, you're absolutely going through probate. Number three, I do a living trust, in which case I avoid probate entirely so long as that trust is funded. Now, why is this important? Because probates are a public record. This keeps my stuff out of a public record. I can have conditions when I have a living trust. I can create a dynasty where I'm creating multi-generational wealth and a legacy that I cannot do with a will. I also have a lot of other provisions that are part of a living trust, including things like a living will, a pour-over will, an advance directive, medical directive, health directive, financial power of attorneys. Those types of things are all part of a living trust. So it's really important that you understand that those three options, I tend to be on that side of the living trust. So I'm going to assume that you made the right decision and did that living trust. And let me just show you the players in a living trust. You have a grantor. That's you. That's whoever gives the asset into the trust. And it's kind of like a triangle. We're just going to call this the trust. There's a trustee who holds the property in their name, because the living trust, you don't just say the Mathis Living Trust and put it on all of our things. It has to be held by an individual as trustee, or an entity as trustee on behalf of that trust for the benefit of, you guessed it, the beneficiaries. So during your lifetime, it might be, let's just say it's me. So here's Toby, Toby as trustee, Toby as beneficiary. And then I have successors. I might say if Toby becomes incapacitated, who steps in? So let's just say it's Bob. Let's pretend I'm not married and that we're not doing spouses, but let's just say it's me. And I say, okay, Bob is going to be my successor trustee. It could be Bank One or whatever. I could have whomever is going to be my trustee. I could even have a convention where it just says a fiduciary, let the beneficiary decide. Right? There's all sorts of things I could do as long as it's in a different name. So during my lifetime, it's me, and then it has a drop down called a successor if something happens to me. So if I become incapacitated or I pass away, boom, the trustee. And then I have the same thing. I have beneficiaries. And maybe this is going to be kids in trust, or better yet, descendants. Legal term, meaning blood of my blood. So my kids, my kids' kids, my kids' 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 kids, right? And I could just say, hold it indefinitely, give them money for health, education, maintenance, and support. This is how a living trust works. These things are triggered automatically so long as the asset is in the trust, right? So now, how do I get my assets in the trust? Well, the most important asset that most people think about when they're talking about their trust is, you guessed it, their home. So here's your home, and you say, how do I get my home into the trust? Well, you are going to need to do a deed transfer. It's actually really simple. So there's a couple things. We want to do a deed transfer from your name, so let's just say it's Toby Mathis, to Toby Mathis, trustee of the Mathis Family Trust. That's all I'm doing, is I'm literally going from one name to another. Things you need to be aware of when you do that deed transfer. Don't do just quit claims, do grant deeds. Make sure that you're talking to somebody, because you want title insurance to continue to cover after you do that transfer. Now, most of the time, if you're dealing with anybody that knows deeds, they're going to immediately say, oh, we're transferring into a living trust, here's how we're going to do it. But I would make sure that you're doing the right type of deed. Make sure that that title insurance is covered. Number two, make sure that when you transfer the property into the living trust, that you let your insurance know, so that they can make sure that it is an additional insured on your policy. A lot of people think, oh, I have to get new insurance. No, you don't. You just need to do it as an additional insured. Now it's covering me and my living trust, because I could always take it back out and put it in my name. I could revoke that living trust in a moment, and I don't want to have to sit here and worry, oh shoot, now I have to go out there and get new insurance. It doesn't work that way. Just add them as an additional insured. Number three is my mortgage, right? What if I transfer it into the living trust? Are they going to come and say, due on sale? No, because we have the Garn-St. Germain Act. If this is your home and this is where you reside, then you're going to be able to do this. I think if it's 4 units or less, it's federal law. They can't trigger the due on sale. And then make sure that it's recorded. And so I'm just going to put deed transfer recorded with your county, so that it's no longer in your name, but it's now in the name of the living trust. Big ones, right? Easy peasy. Next type of asset. Let's go over on this side. Let's say that we have investment accounts, maybe bank accounts. How do we get those transferred? Well, here's how it works. Again, if you're working with a guy like me, chances are you have your investments accounts in an LLC, in which case I am simply going to transfer the LLC ownership from my name, Toby Mathis, into Toby Mathis, trustee of the Mathis Family Trust. I can do that on my internal documents. I let when I have the investment account, if I have an LLC, when I open it up, I let them know that my living trust is the member. So when they're asking, who's the member, you say your living trust. If you don't want to go through the rigmarole of your Schwab or somebody saying, well, you know, where can I see that the trust is is authorized? You give them what's called a trustee's affidavit. You can give them a section of the trustee powers. But if you don't want to deal with that, there's another way to do it, which is you just put yourself there as the sole member, and then you assign it afterwards to your living trust. Either way is going to work, because it's not in your name. This is the big one. If something is in the name of an entity, so let's just say that this is the investment is an LLC, it doesn't die with you. It continues to live. All the banks care about and all the brokerage houses care about is who is authorized to act on behalf of that investment account. And your living trust is going to get you there no matter what, especially if you have that simple assignment saying all of Toby's interest is hereby assigned to his living trust. We do that when we do a living trust, but you want to make sure that that is covered. So for the investment account where it's held in LLC, we will go over that again later, because it's the same thing for like real estate that's held in LLC. I'll show you how to do that transfer. Bank accounts, though, you're just going to want to open up a new account in the name of the living trust. You're going to give your trustee power section. It's going to be a certification of trustee or a trustee's affidavit, whatever the bank asks for. They're going to have terminology that says, we want to see the authority of Toby as trustee to act on behalf of this trust. Once they do that, they don't need to see the whole trust document. And even if they do, you don't care. You're just like, here, take a look at it. Which sections do you want? Well, I want to see that the trustee has the power to have a bank account. Okay, it's in every trust document. Here, you can have it. Open the bank in the name of the trust. So it's going to be Toby Mathis, trustee of the Mathis Family Trust. It'll probably just say Toby Mathis on the bank account, but the bank on their legal documents shows that it's the living trust. So that if something happens to me, again, I pass away, then they're going to say, who's the successor trustee? Where's that documentation? Where's the death certificate showing Toby passed away? Or where's a doctor's confirmation that he's incapacitated? They get that. Boom, somebody moves on to that bank account. You now have control of it. You don't have to probate it. You handle that in 2.5 seconds as opposed to 2.5 years. And that's what we care about, is we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible to avoid complications in the court system. So that's your brokerage accounts. Now, this is important. This is not retirement. Not retirement accounts. Your retirement accounts, you have beneficiaries. What you can do on your retirement accounts is, like, say you have a spouse as a successor under your IRA or 401k, then you could say successor beneficiary, the Mathis Family Trust. Then it will flow in, but you don't have it owned by the actual living trust during your lifetime. It's just going to flow in there because you named it as a successor beneficiary. We do not own our IRAs or 401ks in the name of the living trust. It is a beneficiary, and it's a beneficiary designation. It's not going to be the original beneficiary. It's going to be a successor. So do not put 401ks or IRAs directly into the trust. We just use the beneficiary sections and let them go. All right, let's go back to private entities. So our LLCs, our Incs, limited partnerships, etc. If it's owned by one of these guys, those guys don't have our lifetime. They live long beyond us. Most of these are perpetual entities, which means they're going to live forever. We just have to say and show that the owner is no longer Toby. If I have a bunch of shares in my name, so similar to like if I have a brokerage account and I have a bunch of Microsoft shares in my name, I need to make sure that that brokerage account gets transferred into a brokerage account that is owned by an entity, either an LLC or by the living trust. Like maybe I open up hey, I have a bunch of Microsoft shares, so I open up a Schwab account in the name of living trust and then transfer those shares into it. That way, Toby doesn't own it. Toby as trustee of the Mathis Family Trust own it, and I don't have to go to court. Now, if I have an Inc., LLC, LP, that's a personal property interest in it. So I have shares similar to Microsoft. So how do I know who owns it? I am going to make sure that I assign it to my living trust, and there is a paper trail that shows that those have been transferred to the living trust, or when I open it up, I have the living trust listed on the share certificate or on the shareholder ledger or on the member ledger, whatever I'm using, whether it's a partnership ledger, the member ledger, or the shareholder ledger, that the living trust itself is listed. So I have two choices. I could either own it directly in there and change the ledger, or if it's owned by me, I could assign it into the living trust to make sure that there's a paper trail that shows that it is in the living trust. Now, this is important. This does not work for sole proprietorships. Sole props, you're toast. When you have a sole proprietorship, you are the owner of it. The assets are owned by you. If you pass away, the assets are now going to get tied up in a system. It's either those assets are going to go into the living trust, which is what would happen if we had a pour-over will naming the living trust, or if it was in the name of the living trust. I do not like active businesses in the name of a living trust. Please don't do that. Please put the active business in an Inc. or an LLC or some sort of entity, and then have that interest in that entity held by the living trust. Because if you have a sole proprietorship in a living trust, you have unfettered liability flowing in, and you have a higher audit risk. You lose those audits, you make messes. Do not have a sole proprietorship just sitting in a living trust. If you can avoid it, put it in an LLC, put it in an Inc., have the shares owned by the living trust. It makes things so much simpler. Other big ones, I'm just going to throw this up here with the bank, and I'm going to call it life insurance. Put that right on up there so you can see it. Life insurance is a big one. It's a beneficiary, similar to the retirement accounts. So if you have life insurance, you could say, I own it, right? It's my policy, My beneficiary could be my living trust. So I could own a life insurance policy. When I die, it goes to the Mathis family trust and is distributed in accordance with that trust. Now, why would I do that? I could just use the beneficiary provisions. So let's say I have a $500,000 term policy and I just leave a beneficiary. Okay, I just left them $500,000. I may not want to do that to one of my kids or to somebody that I'm leaving it to or to an organization. I may want to put it under the terms of the trust so I can dictate how the money gets spent when it goes out to them. So for example, if I have a child, let's say they're 30 years old, they drink too much, I'm not really happy with the direction they've taken, and I dump $500,000 on them, what's going to happen? Statistically, there'll be about 16 cents on the dollar left in about 5 years, right? It's going to get spent down. There's all sorts of different studies on this. Bankruptcies spike, all sorts of bad things happen, especially if they have issues with alcohol or drugs or they're just irresponsible. So I might have it go into a living trust instead for their benefit for health, education, maintenance, and support. That way I know that child has money if they need it for their support, for medical attention, if they want to go to school, but they don't have a right to say, give me the $500,000, I'm going to go buy a Lamborghini. I could put a restriction on that. In order to make that work with a life insurance policy, in order to make it work for this guy, I have to have that life insurance have a beneficiary that is the living trust. So don't have the life insurance owned directly in the living trust. That's not how it works. You just have to have a successor beneficiary or a beneficiary of the life insurance policy be the living trust. So I own it during my lifetime, and then when I pass away, instead of just having a named individual, I might just put my living trust. And then the last thing is all of our personal property. So what does that mean? What do I mean by personal property? I mean like your jewelry, all of your art, all the stuff in your house, your furniture, even your cars, all your personal property. You may have, you want it to go into the living trust. You do that with a simple assignment. I assign here, Toby Mathis does hereby assign all interests in all my personal property, list a bunch of different examples, household items, everything, into the living trust. Now, some people, they like to list it out and they're like, hey, here's all my assets, and they start writing it out on their schedule of assets in their living trust. I'm not a big fan of that. I like doing blanket assignments of all of my property, and then if something is titled with a third party, make sure that the title has the living trust on it. So what are examples of things titled with a third party? Anything that's listed in a database with a third party. So vehicles, real estate, those are going to be big examples. If I have something like art or some exceedingly expensive piece that's maybe I'm holding it in an entity, maybe I have antique cars or whatever, maybe I'm holding those in an entity, then make sure the entity is your personal property and you specifically assign that entity and hold it in the name of the living trust like we covered earlier, whether it's a corporation, LLC, LP. You want to make sure that you're holding it as trustee of your living trust. So if I have shares in ABC Inc., that's my privately held company, then it's going to say on my ledger, Toby Mathis, trustee of the Mathis Family Trust. Or if it says Toby Mathis on the ledger, then I'm going to make sure there's an assignment that I put in there that says Toby Mathis does hereby assign 100% of his interest in ABC Inc. to Toby Mathis, trustee of the Mathis Family Trust. Like you could do these blanket assignments and get these assets over there for personal property. If it's titled with a third party, so it's with a Department of Motor Vehicles, then you'd have to do that ahead of time. Now, I'm not going to tell you, put your car in a living trust. I have cars that are titled in the living trust, and I have cars that are not. Sometimes it's too much of a pain in the butt to change that over. I'm not too worried about vehicles, especially if it's a lease or if it's a low value, because you can generally get those transferred fairly easily without having to go through the court system. A lot of times it's an affidavit. So like in my state, it's an affidavit. It's fairly simple. But if you have an expensive car, if you go out and buy a nice car, when you buy it, it might be wise to put Toby Mathis and your living trust on it. I've done it, so I know it's doable. It's just not the most critical thing. What's the critical thing are things like your investment accounts, your bank account, and your house, and making sure that those are covered, because those are the ones that get tied up in probate the longest, especially your real estate. And I'm going to leave you with this. Anywhere that you own real estate in your name, any state, you will need to probate in that state if it's in your name. Now, you might have it as joint tenants with right of survivorship and have it go to somebody else. Eventually, that's going to have to get probated, right? Somebody's going to have to pay the piper on that eventually. But if you own it like it's just me, let's say I was single and I own property in Nevada and Washington and California, I am probating in Nevada, Washington, and California if I pass away and they're all in my name. So I want to make sure that that real estate, at a minimum, is in my trust. Better yet, if you have investment real estate, of course, you're using LLCs or other entities to isolate your liability. But we want to make sure that we are not forcing a system where we're probating. So if you have titled assets, real property in multiple jurisdictions, get it out, make sure it goes into trust. There's living trust, there's land trust, there's LLCs. All of them will accomplish the same thing, but get it out of your name so you're not having to probate in each one of those states. So hopefully this has been a easy layup, like a layout for you guys as to what you want to make sure of is covered inside your living trust. We've covered all your personal property, things that are titled with third parties. We talked about banks. We talked about investment accounts, brokerage accounts. We talked about your businesses, all of those things, how they're held with that living trust. So hopefully you can make sure that you are not caught unawares. And then, of course, you always have a safety net. Your safety net is, I have a pour-over will that names the living trust as the sole beneficiary. So in the unlikely event that I didn't implement these strategies and I didn't transfer assets, worst case scenario, there's one beneficiary of your estate, and that is the living trust, so that you can still keep your distributions personal and private, keep it out of the public record, and keep it away from the court system. Guys, if you have any comments, leave them below. Like and subscribe, and please share this information, this video, with anybody who you know is using a living trust and you're worried, hey, I want to make sure you funded it. Go ahead and share it with them. They'll thank you later. Thanks, guys.